Well, anniversary of the church, 6 years, 6 years. Every time I read that Ephesian letter that a part of which Heidi read this morning, every time I read that, I thought about that Ephesian church, and I don't know how old they were at the time, but boy, to me this week they were 6 years old. I thought of how we started here, and I thought of the sociological, the economic shifts, of the political concerns that we have had during those 6 years, and the way in which the steadfastness that we found here hopefully made us strong, helped us walk as kind, good people in strength, and still being able to know the steadfastness under our feet. I say that because what better place to be thinking of a 6-year-old church than the church in Ephesus that's accounted in Ephesians, because that church was made up of people that were Jewish, but some of them had accepted Christianity as the grounding of their life. Many of the Jews had not. It also was a place where Greeks had become Christians, but certainly not all. It also, Ephesus was the center of the Greek and Roman gods. So the celebrations and happenings that went on, it must have been a very, very exciting time, stressful time and place. And it was into that a guy started a church. He didn't stay forever. He stayed for a while, and then he went on to do other ministries elsewhere. Sure, that's never happened before. And there they were. There they were to continue being that church. There they were, continued to being that church, and every time we read a letter, I guess I really hope that if we got a letter from one of those, it would be those words from Thessalonian that says something like, what you're doing, do so more and more. Wouldn't that be? Wouldn't that be? But always, even in those encouraging kinds of words, there's always a way in which we're asked to reflect, to take a deep breath, to see who it is and whose we are, and how the early years become all of the years that lie before us. And the book of Ephesians is doing that. It's really kind of got two parts. It has the part where it explains how Christians see God. And that's important because there have been people who've described God to you and me in ways that make us gulp and sigh and actually have difficulties in representing then any other thing. The early Christians in the part of Ephesians were saying that what God was somebody you could count on, that cared about all people, that God was creator and power and source and redeemer and sustainer, and that was good for them to hear. It's good for us to hear too, because what it says is we don't have to invent the church. We don't have to invent the church. We have to listen and see how it is we can participate in that we're called to participate, that we have the good fun to participate, and that sometimes we have the awkward stance that the world says that we need to take. I think if there was a movie version of the starting of a church, that at the end when the credits would roll, I think it would say the producer was God. The director was Christ. And then when the cast, all the rest of us start showing up in that, do you notice how, especially in these animated times, how many, many hundreds of people take part with their specialized way of making this church live out its call. And so we hear the words describing God, and we can hear the ways in which that's been explained to us and from us and lived out for 6 years. And then comes what's Christ got to do with it part of Ephesians. Christ reminding them all, then and forever and always, and us too, what is it that is God's thing? What is it that is God's thing? What is it Christ's life said that causes me to walk and talk and relate and do and be and die and rise again? What is it that is God's thing? And the answer in Ephesians to what it is God's thing is that God through Christ brings all things together, everything and everybody. It's in one word, unity. The unity that love brings as a connection. It is very important to note, though, when you hear the word unity as the purpose of the church. It's very important to note that unity is not the same as uniformity. And what church tries to remind itself of that every week? Unity is not the same as uniformity. There are many people in many kinds of walks of life, and there are all kinds of different talents and gifts. There are those who sit in prayer and empower the room in that fashion. There are ones of you who take the service and outreach of this church out into the world. Unity, but not uniformity. A way in which all of our talents can be played out. There is always, and you could bet there was in Ephesus, things have not changed along this line. There were people that had put themselves on the sidelines because they didn't think they mattered that much. And there were people that the world put on the sidelines and said, in fact, you don't matter. And so this church has chosen to be a place for all people, and many, many more are doing that. We need to speak loudly with service and smile and eagerness and strength to let people know we are here and we are not alone when it comes to that kind of beauty of the grace of God. Now, there's only 4 points made in the book of Ephesians, and they're very short. It's 4 things that make the church what it is. Would you like to know what 4 things make the church what it is? You might not guess what the first one listed was. It was singing. Singing. I see our choir just kind of, okay, that's the first. Now, if that's the first one to mention, the second one, in case you have missed the first, the second one is singing together. That's the second one. If this doesn't get our director of music and his worthy cohorts, a lot of PR, nothing would on that. And then the third one is the word thanksgiving. Being thankful in all things. Being thankful in the things that it's easy to be thankful for, and being thankful for the things that it's not, because they come. But living it and living it together with others who care, living it allows us to pause in our life and to reach within for newfound strength and peace, and to have that then to share with others. The fourth one, so we got singing together, we got thanksgiving, and the fourth one is how you treat and value and live with all people. How you treat and value and live with all people. We have 4 or 5, I don't know how many are going to be coming up today, but we have some people from the earliest years of Good Samaritan, and they're going to tell you what they found and why they are here. Their stories are important because they're theirs, but their stories are important because their words, my guess is, if I were an Irish betting woman, I'd bet on it, you will hear something of your story to our speakers.
Good morning. My name is Lara Dreyer, and thank you, Yvonne, and everyone for this opportunity. First, let me say, glory to God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine. In 2013, I had the great privilege of serving on a task force of people from across the diocese to spend time listening and discerning and dreaming about what God was calling the Episcopal Church in central and southern Indiana to become. We dreamed of faith communities rooted in our baptismal promises like following Jesus, loving our neighbors as ourselves, resisting evil, respecting the dignity of every human being. We heard a hunger for growing relationships over having stuff, and a vision that church properties be spaces serving their wider communities. As is the way of such projects, we finished our work, prepared our report, with our data and dreams and recommendations and presented it to the diocesan convention. For me, though, the experience sparked a curiosity and eagerness to be part of a new kind of Episcopal Church. About a year later, I was nominated to be part of the Bishop Search Committee, whose work culminated in the election of Bishop Jennifer as our new diocesan bishop. And again, we dreamed of faith communities showing God's love, growing in courage, and opening ourselves to God doing a new thing. The Reverend Gray Lacine also served on this committee, and as we worked together, I could see his energy, his respect for lay leadership, and his commitment to collaboration and authenticity. When I saw the news that he was planting a new Episcopal church in Brandenburg, a church without walls, a church focused on serving, on loving, serving, and including all people, no exceptions, I emailed him the same day to share my congratulations and express my excitement and offer my support. Gray officially began his church planting work in 2015 and soon after began gathering people for study, discernment, service, and worship. One of the most transformative experiences for me in those early days of what would become Good Sam's was the first Going Deeper group. In my 30-plus years of being unchurched, my 4 years of searching for a faith community, and my 6 years as an Episcopalian, no one had asked me to share my spiritual autobiography, my story. In that supportive, non-judgmental space,
I was first trusted by others, trusted to hear their stories, trusted to help make a brave space where they could share about their experiences and how they had shaped them in their faith. Joys, doubts, hurts, and some heart-shattering tragedies, and how they experienced God through it all, and how they experienced God in their lives now. Through their courage and stories and trust, I was able to gather the pieces of my story, find words to express it, and the courage to trust enough to share it with them. That making space to be vulnerable, to be real, to tell the truth, to listen without judgment, to share in grief and celebration, and to grow in God's love through it all is for me at the heart of what makes Good Samaritan so special. Glory to God, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we can ask or imagine.
Wow, isn't that interesting? I didn't know all that stuff. She just said, I'm going to lay some of the history, so can I go first? I'm like, that's cool, because my history starts right after that. In 2014, gay marriage became legal in Indiana, and that changed my life. My life had changed a little bit before that because I had a gay kid, but in 2014, I kind of had a choice to make, so I made a choice and supported gay marriage, and then I lost my job. And so I needed to find some like-minded people, and so I started Googling, like most of us did, and my Googling brought me to what Laura was talking about. And I found out that Gray was starting, this church in town. And so one of the first things that I think that we did together as a church that I came to was doing some kind of gardening out at the end of Harris here. So I came to that, and I want to tell you about some people that I met at the beginning, because at the end of the day, it's kind of a people thing for me, although it has to be very much a theology thing too. So people with like-minded theology, okay? So I met Laura. I can remember Laura being there that day, and I can remember chatting with her and just finding out that she was a pretty interesting person. A couple years later, I remember that we had this big problem because we were trying to move my elderly aunt, from Arkansas to Indiana, and she had a bunch of stuff, and we didn't have a vehicle that could pull her stuff. And I remember Dan and Laura just saying, take our CRV. I'm like, seriously? So we took their CRV. They don't have it anymore, so you can't borrow it. But So I was like, well, that was cool. Another person I met at the garden was Carol Baum. How many of you knew Carol Baum? Okay. So I met Carol, and usually when churches are starting, you're like meeting a bunch of young people. I was a little worried that I'd be the oldest person around. But Carol was older than me, significantly older. And I can just remember having these conversations with Carol. Man, that woman was just full of life, And she had been everywhere and done everything, including teaching in this building for a bazillion years. And also, her husband was a minister of a different denomination. And I can remember kind of her saying, well, it's time for change or something. And I thought, good grief, if that woman can leave whatever she's leaving and join, this group of people, then I can surely do it. I remember her being at that gas giveaway too. Were you there, Andy? That was hilarious. And we did a gas giveaway in the very early days, and people just pulled into the marathon down there, and we gave them free gas. And Carol was there holding the sign or pumping the gas, and I thought, that's somebody I want to hang around with on a long-term basis. Then I met Yvonne and Cal. They were the two most unassuming people who were at this little garden party, or maybe that was once we started in the pantry. And I can remember sitting on the little ledge out there and chatting with them one evening after we were done and thinking, my goodness, these people are terribly interesting. I just kept meeting all these interesting people. And I thought, they have been everywhere and done everything. And yet there was still this enthusiasm to do new things and more things. And a couple years later, when I needed somebody to drive me home after my colonoscopy, like, I don't know if they're available for all colonoscopies, but I remember kind of coming to and sitting there, and somebody had brought him back into the room, and they were like, the doctor says you're good, it's all good. Thank you. And then when a tree fell on both of our vehicles a couple years ago and totaled both of our cars, they were like, you can borrow the Prius. I don't know that the Prius is available for all of y'all's, but but those are the kind of people. I remember meeting Wendy at the food pantry thing, and you were still living in Bloomington then, I think. So driving up, or had just moved here. And she was terribly interesting. I'm like, wow, she's a professor at Butler, and her husband's like a nuclear scientist or something. And I remember going home and saying to Bob, you got to meet these people. They're like really interesting. There's a lot of smart people in this church. And then Steve and Tim, like, my whole life changed because of my support for gay marriage, but I'd never been to a gay wedding, you know what I mean? Until theirs. And it was like, oh my gosh, I've been to a lot of weddings. I've been to a lot of church weddings. I've been to a lot of spiritual church weddings. But their wedding was the most spiritual thing I'd ever been to. And I didn't think I'd feel that way. I thought I'd feel uncomfortable. And I was like, yay, It was just, every bit of it was awesome. One more person, Barbie. I remember the first time that we decided to walk in the 4th of July parade. This had to have been in 2015, maybe 16, I don't know. We didn't even have our own t-shirts. Like, Brian and Barbie showed up with t-shirts from the diocese, and we put all those on, and we had a sign from the Indy Dio, and there weren't very many of us. And I was all excited about it. I was like, yeah, I'm all about this. Then I started down the roads of Brownsburg, where I've lived since 1981, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like declaring my truth here, and it was weird, but so cool to be identified with this group of people who were about loving, serving, including all people. That's been our message from the absolute get-go, and it will be forever. That's my story.
That's a really hard act to follow, I have to tell you. My name is Christa Nierzwick. I am one of those lifelong Episcopalians. My father and my sister are both Episcopal priests, and my mother was always very involved in children's formation. Yet I was never really interested in going to church. As an adult, after Mark and I had had kids, I felt it was time to get involved again. Living in Brandenburg, we had visited a few local churches, but I really wanted an Episcopal church. I liked the beautiful organ music, the fancy vestments that the clergy wore. To me, that's what church was supposed to be. We ended up at an Episcopal church in a neighboring town, but always wished that our church was closer. Then one day in 2015, I saw a Facebook post where Lara was talking about this new Episcopal community in Brandenburg that was starting to meet occasionally. I was very anxious to meet this, to check out this new church. And what we found was a group of people meeting at a shelter in the park. And that was about as far away as you could get from my vision of a beautiful church with stained glass windows, fancy vestments, a beautiful pipe organ music, and a room full of stoic people. Instead, I found a group of people that were more welcoming than any other church I had ever been to, and I've been to plenty. We stayed because it was so different and so new. This small group of wonderful people could form this new community. This small group of wonderful people could form this new gathering into a beautiful community. The lack of a building, the sitting in folding chairs, the lack of a pipe organ no longer mattered. I found that I loved the music that Kendall played. Where is he? I love it. I never thought playing a dulcimer in church was going to be a cool thing, but it is. It's amazing. I love wearing jeans and a t-shirt to church. I love that everybody in this new community was loving and welcoming of anyone who walked through the door to join us. We came because Good Samaritan was new and different, but we have stayed because we love it here.
Good morning. I'm obviously Mark, as part of the Mark and Christa group here. When I asked why I first came to Good Sam's more than 6 years ago, the answer is simple. Christa wanted to come to Good Sam's, therefore I wanted to come to Good Sam's. I am not an Episcopalian by birth. Growing up, my family went to the Methodist Church here in Brandenburg. To be honest, the concept of loving, serving, and including all people, no exceptions, may sound simple, but it may not always feel easy to do. For me, it has been a journey that has taken place over time. I once saw a video about a study where people were shown several photos of faces, and they found that it only takes a fifth of a second for somebody to make a judgment about that person. Some may look trustworthy or kind, but maybe they look mean or devious. Humans basically can't help themselves. This judgment happens automatically. But even more interestingly, the same study found that this judgment is wrong nearly 99% of the time. Being at Good Sam's has helped shape the way I see people, especially those that are different from me. One of the ways I try to live the words love, serve, and include all people, no exception, is to remind myself what is really important. When meeting new people, that urge to judge may still exist, but now the thought process goes something like this. What's their skin color? Doesn't matter. What do they do for a living? Doesn't matter. What's their gender? Doesn't matter. What's their spouse's gender? Really doesn't matter. What really matters is that you are all God's creations, and I see you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for asking me to speak today, Yvonne. I am Tim Grino. I don't know if most of you know me, but I've been coming to Good Sam's with my husband, Stephen, since November of 2016. The weekend before Thanksgiving is when we actually came to Good Sam's. But so they had just been meeting in the library still. And prior to coming to Good Sam's, we were in a big place of disconnect in our lives. We were disconnected from each other. We were definitely disconnected from God, and definitely were disconnected from just a lot of things. So one of the ways that we were trying to mend was to find a spiritual home for both of us in which we could grow together. So I had known about the property on 56th Street and had driven by it and kind of knew that there was an Episcopal presence in Brownsburg, had gone to many Episcopal churches in my life, but Stephen actually found the church online and said, hey, there's this church in Brownsburg, maybe we should go try it, and they meet in a school, and I'm sure that I probably made a look because much like Christa, part of what I love about church was, I grew up Catholic, so I love the things about church, right? The incense and the beautiful vestments and the music and the fellowship and the routine and all of the things about service were really what I get out of church, and being able to be a part of that in music, and that is something that I had been doing my whole life. So for me, coming to church at a school, not in a building, was a big stretch. So I said, I'll keep an open mind, let's go, and we'll see what happens. So little did I know what I was in for, but, and a preface, you guys all know I wear my heart on my sleeve, so if my eyes leak a little bit, that's why. But anyway, we came that first day. I was greeted so beautifully by Carol Baum, who, God love her, she was just so wonderfully welcoming and had amazing conversations, and I met Nanci Slagle that day and had wonderful conversations as well. Genuinely felt truly welcomed and seen, and in the most probably authentic way that I've ever been seen in a faith setting before. So that was something that I had never experienced in my life. And I remember the message and the sermon of that day being about inclusion and being about truly loving everybody and truly seeing people. And I was very profoundly moved by it. And after service, I remember getting in the car and Stephen said to me, that's the first time I've heard the word gay used in a sermon in a context that wasn't negative. And I started crying and I said, me too. I never really thought about it, but honestly, we found our place. Like, this is it, right? So we came back and have been coming back since November of 2016. But I really think the thing that strikes me about Good Samaritan is that little caveat, no exceptions, right? We truly live that no exceptions. And that is something that we all understand because many of us have lived on the margins in some way or have known people on the margins or love people that have been marginalized in their lives by faith communities specifically. So to be a part of a faith community where our purpose is to include and love and serve all without exception really means something. So, but we're in a place here where our differences are not just welcomed or tolerated, they're truly celebrated. So we've had the opportunity in this church for Stephen to get baptized. We got married in this church. I've had the opportunity to share music and to be a part of music here, which I love, and to also be challenged by the radical love here, to share gifts that I didn't realize that I had, right? Like, who would have thought that I would ever have led a Going Deeper group or been a part of that whole experience, which has been profound for me as well. So I really think that, when I think of Good Samaritan, I think of a lot of words, right? Service, community, acceptance. We hear about the transformative stories all the time with this community. But really what's here, it's God's love, you guys. It's in me, it's in you. It's what we bring from this place. It's what we share with the world. It's how we make the world better. So to say that I'm grateful is a gross understatement. I just want to say thanks be to God for this amazing community. And happy birthday, Good Samaritan.
I just bet that you all heard a heart after heart expressing their appreciation to folks like you, to a God like this. I hope it also reminded you of some things just like that are your reasons to be here. Having been a church planter myself, I want you to know I was there 13 and a half years, And there came 2 times during the 13 and a half years that a very open, affirming of all people church that was based on service and walking through the world would occasionally saying at 2 different times of growth, you know, I don't know everybody as well as I used to. That worries me. Maybe we're about as big as we want to get. Maybe we're about as big as we want to get. Now, we're not close to that, but I want you to know that tendency that gets somehow built in, even if it comes out in different feelings, in different words. And what I want you to know is that every time we have those times, wouldn't it be nice if it was the way it was back when? Remember why you're here, and remember why they came, and remember every single time that there's multitudes of people out there that want that kind of acceptance and that kind of love. And you know what? Those times that creep in will not last very long.